something that Trump posted on his Truth Social, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, where he said, or he was interviewed and said, that the reason that the stock market is doing well is because of his lead in the polls. Is that a thing? Go.
And also, well, wait. And also, I think that it's more than just Trump. Do presidents in general, do they dictate how the markets are?
Yeah. So generally speaking, and I'll kind of hit that last part first. Generally speaking, I don't think that there is a role in the global economy that is more overhyped than the president of the United States. I think that they can have an impact as it relates to tax policy. So, for instance, when Trump got elected, the market sold off right overnight, which seemed ridiculous to us because I was like, the guy's promising tax cuts, like profit margins are going to go up. Here we go, right? So they can have impacts on the marginal side of it, but I mean, literally, and I'm just stating this is not a political statement; it's a fact. Trump taking credit for the stock market doing well because he's leading in the polls is the equivalent of Bidenomics. It's complete nonsense. Okay, the stock market's doing well because the Federal Reserve, despite the fact they say they're cutting interest rates, cannot help themselves from hemorrhaging money into the economy. The federal government's running a $2.1 trillion deficit, and consumers are still high from the greatest monetary handout of all time. Okay, full stop. That's why.
So if he wins, like say he wins in November, do you think that I mean, obviously it's going to have some effect. Don't you think it'll have some effect on the markets?
Yeah, I think it will initially, meaning one thing you typically see is you see markets stabilize and become more serene after a president is elected. Mm-hmm. You don't typically see a plunge just because markets like certainty. So even if they're not nuts about the president, the fact that the issue is over resolved and it's behind us is kind of a pressure alleviator for markets, if you will. But I think it's really important that we talk about, the difference between the economy and the stock market, because I don't think the two have ever been more disconnected. I think the president, the president can have an impact on markets the same way the Federal Reserve does, meaning they can go out and speak soothingly, but what do they really impact as far as the economy goes? There are moments in time, right? FDR, I think, had a huge impact on the economy. I think Reagan, at his period of time, had a big impact on the economy. So I think presidents, if they meet the right set of circumstances with the right policies, I think they can have a big impact. Those just don't come along very often, right? Like a lot of times we give the man credit, but probably any man in his position would have done the same, or similar to it. So anyway, my whole thing saying and this to me is like the tough part about Trump, right? Like, you hear a couple things, you're like, hey, you know what? I can get with that. And then he says something like that, and you're just like, dude, come. Just come on.
You can't take credit for all of that. Yeah.
I mean, everything in the world is not a referendum on you. Okay. It's just not.
Okay. But in his defense, I mean, and I don't know anything about anything, as you know, when it comes to the markets or finances, but isn't it true? I mean, I do think he's wrong about, I think it's ridiculous for him to say that the market is doing what it's doing because of his lead in the polls. Like, that's insane. But isn't it true that if he wins the presidency, that the market could react to that because he is so historically business friendly, and that companies would be like, yay, he's going to decrease regulations. Right. Everything's going to be doing really well for us. I mean, isn't there some truth to that?
Yeah, there is some truth. And for instance, I think that quite honestly, and again, I can't read the tea leaves, but quite honestly, I think that anybody, assuming that they're a functional adult, I think is going to have somewhat, I mean, we'll see what the conditions of the market and the economy are around election time. But honestly, I think anybody that is a full functioning adult that gets elected is going to have a positive impact, just because markets know the lack of what's running the show right now, right? Like but market participants know this is a joke, that this is this is a paper tiger, that that he's got people pulling the strings. Markets know that. But again, I think looking at the other part of it is I don't think markets do the same thing. So to answer your question, I think prior to 08, 09, I think much of what you're talking about makes a lot more sense. Meaning, I think markets would care about presidential policy, all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, that is not why we're sitting at 26 times earnings on the S&P 500. That is not why markets have done what they've done. They have done what they've done because of a orgy of government spending. Okay, like period. And if that level of spending keeps up, it's going to be really hard for markets to fall meaningfully. Could they pull back 20 to 30? Yeah, I think if you pulled back 20 to 30% from here, you'd actually have a pretty decently priced market. It would make some sense. It doesn't make any sense right here. So I think that yes, the president can have an impact. It's not as big as people think. But I think that his impact is less so. He may come up with, right, the market will interpret him as being more business or more stock market friendly if he gets elected. They will. Okay. The question is what's happening on the federal spending side of it, because that money being pumped into the system at the end of the day, that is rubber meeting the road, right? So regardless of whether he does the right thing or the wrong thing, or says the right thing or the wrong thing, if they keep pouring money into the system like this, it's got to go somewhere, and it's going to keep elevating asset prices. So
the they is right wingers too. They're spending just like Democrats are spending. People on our side of the aisle. Yeah.
Yeah. No, we've joked about it on this show before with you guys, right? It's one of the things that drives me nuts about Republicans in general, and then hardcore, hardline Republican only, and I stand for fiscal discipline. And I'm like, the only time the Republican Party ever cares about fiscal discipline is when a Democrat's in the White House. That's the only time you ever even hear it brought up, right? And everybody goes, true. Biden's going to double the debt, and Obama doubled the debt. And I'm like, Trump was on target to double the debt. Bush doubled the debt in 8 years. Obama doubled the debt in 8 years. Trump was on his way to doubling the debt in 8 years. The one thing that doesn't change is the elected officials in DC continue to get wealthier and wealthier and wealthier, and the rest of us keep paying a bigger and bigger bill, right? At the end of the day, that's what's going on, right?